Good afternoon, everyone. This is Miriam Glaze from Athlete Soul. I'm here for a weekly educational webinar with James Fletcher. We're going to be talking about the breath and the nervous system today, and I will let him talk a little bit further about that. But in the meantime, I wanted to just give you some information about today's webinar. So we are recording the event as we usually do. It will be available on our website. And you will receive it by email also after this event. If you want to ask any question, you can actually do that throughout the presentation. I would like you guys to go either through the Q&A box or the chat box to ask your question, and I will then be asking them to James. And then at the end of this presentation, we'll do a little bit more questions as well. If you're interested in more of our events, you can also go to our website at www.athletesoul.space/events, and you'll have access to all of our events for August, as well as we just released all of our events for 2020-2021, so you're welcome to go and check it out. And we're not going to get started. James, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your schedule to do this, and I'll pass it on to you now.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and thanks everyone for tuning in. For those that tune in later, welcome. Yeah, I'm James Fletcher. I'm here in Australia at the moment, and I'm a physiotherapist by trade. So physiotherapist, a little bit different to, I think they call it a physical therapist in America, and I'm also an exercise physiologist. So an exercise physiologist understands the body, understands load and adaptations that the body will make in response to stress, in response to load. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today, and that's the basis of improving yourself as an athlete, is adding stress to the body. The body recognizes that stress and adapts to that stress, and then you improve your performance. Now, stress can be too little or it can be too much, and we utilize the breath and breathing techniques to help manage that stress and help manage our performance as well. In terms of, what I've done in the breath space, so this is an Olympic swimmer, and I started my journey, it would have been 12 years ago with the breath, and I worked with Cirque du Soleil. So I was traveling around the world with 72 athletes, and we were in Japan, and we had the tsunami event take place in Japan, and we had to evacuate Tokyo, and then we had to move to China because of the earthquake situation. And then we quickly found ourselves back in Tokyo, and with a bunch of athletes who were trying to warm up and trying to perform with aftershocks and stress, and trying to manage their lives and their performance as well. So I had to find a solution to try and help manage these athletes' pre-performance anxiety, their shortness of breath levels, and calm their nervous systems down in this stressful situation that we found ourselves in. At the same time, my mum was diagnosed with a respiratory condition called COPD. It's smoker's disease. And I had to try and manage her health from afar as well. And that started my journey in looking at research. I lecture at university now in the breath, and I'd like to consider myself as a breathing expert. However, there's no qualifications for breathing experts. Anyone can sort of put their hand up and say that they are, which is also a little bit of a challenge out there today with the breath, is who you do listen to and who you do use to help look at your performance. So there's lots of things out there, and we're going to do a little practical session right now, and in no way am I saying that this person is unqualified. But the techniques that we'll unpack and look at, is how we approach, or how I approach the breath is, what do you do for a sport? So what are the key elements to your sport where breathing can help? And who are you, and what are you as an athlete? So every athlete is so different. That picture that you're looking at now, that's Cameron McAvoy. He's world champion 100-meter freestyler. When I first started working with him, we had to start essentially how I do with my patients who are sick. So we had to really lie him down and teach him how to start breathing properly again. I found that weird. He was one of my first patients as a swimmer, and I treat in every new athlete as a blank canvas. But generally, swimmers have had some form of breath training in the past, purely for the fact that they have to take breaths in quickly. So that's some kind of training for them consistently. And they're also got a hydrostatic force on their body as they start to breathe in. So when they're breathing in, they're actually breathing in against a resistance. So that presents some challenges, but it also can lead us to a great foundation to start our breath training. I also do want to mention to anyone, if you want to ask any questions, just fire them out at me. I want to keep this a pretty dynamic presentation, and I don't mind going left and right, up and down, as long as we sort of stay on track. And I guess that's what the slides can help us do there. So I've worked with swimmers, biathletes, boxers, MMA fighters, cyclists, freestyle motorcyclists. I really enjoy working with athletes from different backgrounds, individually and different sports as well, because I feel like I take something from each sport and then I can pass that on to any other person or sport that I run into. And a great example of that was working with the Canadian biathlon team. So biathlon is a sport where they, if you don't know it, they essentially run a marathon on skis, and then they come down and they've got 20 seconds to try and recover, and then they have to shoot targets. And they shoot targets either standing up or lying down on their tummy. So we worked with the team to try and adopt different breathing techniques for those different positions so that they could try and maintain a stable base of support when they were shooting the targets. And it turns out 3 weeks later, I was in Vegas working with the MMA team, and guess who finds themselves in weird positions where they can't breathe sometimes. So utilizing the ideas and techniques that the biathlon team was doing, we were able to transfer that across to some MMA fighters if they found themselves being choked or being squeezed in certain positions. So hopefully, we've got some people listening in from those sports, but if not, the breath has a great application across many sports, and hopefully we'll show you just some practical applications of that in a couple of slides. In terms of breath and its popularity, I think that no one's done it better than the man that we're looking at right now. So fantastic character, and I utilize his techniques as the basis of the physiology that we can create and change within the body within 10 or 15 seconds. So the breath has a direct effect on our physiology. I don't regularly, actually at all, prescribe this method to anyone. However, a lot of the people I work with do this method, and what I do with my patients allows them to do this Wim Hof method a lot better as well. I don't know if we want to do it now, but I'll show you what it looks like. I'll do 8 breaths of it, and for those people listening now and listening later, they can do it with us as well. So essentially we're taking 8 deep, fast breaths, okay? And I'll do it now, and then you guys can copy me at home, and then we're going to unpack what actually is going on. And again, it's going to show you the physiological changes we can have in our body within 10 to 15 seconds. Right, so if we go in now, big breath in. So if we just leave it there, usually in a Wim Hof course or a class, I have to take my jacket off now, I'm starting to get a little hot. In a Wim Hof class, participants will be doing this up to 30 minutes, up to 45 minutes, and they'll also be including some breath holds as well. So what actually is going on when we're doing this Wim Hof technique, and we'll talk about where its prescription lies later. So I will move this out of the way. So as we're breathing in oxygen. A lot of the literature and a lot of the discussions around breath is to hyperoxygenate or breathe in more oxygen and get more oxygen ready for the tissues. And that actually isn't what's going on. So if we're sitting here, I'll grab my pulse oximeter at the same time. As we're sitting here, most of us, if we don't have a breathing pathology, will be sitting at a oxygenation level or saturation level, which is what we call it, of around 97 to 100%. What that means is that we can't get any more oxygen into our tissues because there's actually no more seats left for the oxygen to jump on. So we can try all as we might to try and get more oxygen into the tissues, but it's not going to work, no matter how much more you breathe in or out. As we sit here, you can see that it's 99. So 99% of, I call it 99% of the seats in my cars. All right, so my hemoglobin is the car and the seats are all full. So even if I ask more passengers in, more oxygen into the tissues, we're not going to be able to carry any more oxygen. So why would we do this type of breathing pattern before we're about to go out or exercise? It's not giving us more oxygen. There's another thing that's happening though. As we breathe out, you'll see down here, as we breathe out, carbon dioxide leaves the tissues. Now, carbon dioxide is produced from cellular respiration, so from our muscles being utilised for movement, our body's systems being used for processing food, our brains processing thoughts and memories. Carbon dioxide is produced. Carbon dioxide travels in the cars, so oxygen leaves the car, goes into the tissues to give it energy. And then as oxygen gets out, the CO2 jumps in that Uber and then it's on its way to the lungs to get breathed out. So what's actually happening with the Wim Hof technique is we are exhaling or breathing off all of our carbon dioxide. So our carbon dioxide levels in the body start to reduce. Now that can happen. Unlike oxygen, we can't breathe any more in. We can't put any more oxygen within those cars. We are 99% saturated. We can breathe off a lot of our carbon dioxide. Now that's really important because two things happen with that when we breathe out our carbon dioxide. One, we start to get more alkaline blood. And as you would have felt with that short demonstration there, you would have felt a little flushed. You would have felt a little warm. Sometimes you can feel a little tingly, and if you keep doing it, you can start to feel a little crampy in your muscles. And now that's the physiological effect of reducing carbon dioxide in that acute phase when we breathe a lot, hyperventilate. So if we're breathing out carbon dioxide, we're increasing the pH of our blood, making it more alkaline. Now, whatever happens in that space, if you tune into the Wim Hof method, then that's where we get a lot of our physiological benefits in the longer term by making our system more alkaline. Fantastic. I would agree with that. However, in the short term, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice. So by making our blood more alkaline or increasing our pH, what we're actually telling the body is to hold on to our oxygen, essentially lock the doors of the Uber. It's a bit creepy. Lock the doors of the Uber and not let the oxygen off at its destination, which is the muscles or the brain. So again, there's no reason that I'd give this to an athlete before a performance because I'm actually telling the system to do the opposite to what it should be doing. The other important thing around carbon dioxide is it is the trigger or it's the signal for us to take another breath. So we're going to do a little practical later as well. When we hold our breath, what's actually happening is the reverse of Wim Hof. Carbon dioxide levels go up. And for those people who practice Wim Hof, you would notice that when you do the technique, you can actually hold your breath for longer. It's because you've blown off all your carbon dioxide, which is the trigger or the stimulus to take a breath. So in essence, if I wanted to hold my breath for a longer period of time at a party to show off, I'd probably do the Wim Hof method beforehand so I could get a good result. But remember, if we're practicing our breath hold for my swimmers or for my free divers or the big wave surfers I work with, we're actually removing the stimulus that the body needs to make that change. So, we go to the gym, we lift heavy weights, we swim, we run. If we blow off all that carbon dioxide, then we've lost that stimulus for the body to adapt to that carbon dioxide level and get the benefits that we want with our breath. So again, really challenging technique to prescribe to athletes or to people, apart from that wellness phase that it quite clearly lives in. So hopefully we understand a little bit more about oxygen delivery, that idea of we can't hyperoxygenate the system. Also, that cellular respiration, and the harder we work out, the more carbon dioxide we're producing. The more carbon dioxide we're producing, the more we have to breathe, the more we have to breathe off. Right? If we hold our breath, then our carbon dioxide levels are going to increase, and then that's the stimulus to take a breath. The carbon dioxide is the only stimulus that we have to take a breath. That's why it's really dangerous to do Wim Hof before you go free diving or jumping in the water. Any questions so far? Cool.
I don't think we have any questions so far.
All right. That must be doing a good job or a bad job. All right. We'll keep going. So in terms of breathing, I did mention that carbon dioxide is the only stimulus the body listens to take another breath. How it does that is very interesting. So where we start to think about the breath and the nervous system this is the slide that sort of ties it all together. So you'll see in the bottom right of the screen as you're looking at it, the heart. So that's this carbon dioxide sensors. And actually last year, some people received the Nobel Prize for starting to understand how oxygen is censored in the body. So that's not quite right where it says CO2 and oxygen sensors in aorta. So the carbon dioxide sensors in aorta, what they do is they measure the level of carbon dioxide within the body. If we're starting to hold our breath, okay, and we start to build that urge to take a breath, they're the sensors that lead up to the brain. So that goes up to the brain, and it's in the medulla or the medulla. So this is in the ancient part of the brain, in the brainstem, which controls our respiration. So that signal goes to the brain and say, hey, breathe more, or hey, breathe less. What the most interesting component about respiration, and this was one of the big sort of awakening points for me in my first sort of discovery around the breath, is as we are sitting here, our heart's beating. It's controlled in the same center, in a center nearby. So our heart actually has sensors within the heart as well that fire it off automatically, but we have no control over the heart, and it's doing its own job. We don't have any control. However, without breathing, until I tell you to start thinking about your breathing, it's happening automatically as well. So it's controlled in the brainstem, and those signals that send information to the brainstem are giving us that automatic breathing. However, what we do have is voluntary control over that system as well. So unlike the heart, where we don't have that voluntary control, we can take control of respiration. What that does is it gives us access straight into that brainstem, into that old part of ourselves where our parasympathetic and our sympathetic nervous systems start to be influenced. So we can have some great influence over our brainstem, great influence over our nervous system using the breath, because we do have voluntary control over this old system. I hope that makes sense to people who are listening, because that's for me, it was like, oh, okay. So if I had control over my heart rate, maybe I could do the same thing, but we have voluntary control. We just did the Wim Hof, which is over breathing, right? And some of the sleep breathing that we're going to do later is actually going to slow our breathing rates down. And like we talked about, we can hold our breath, which is a stress stimulus, or like the Wim Hof, we can overbreathe, which is a stress stimulus as well. So by utilizing voluntary control of the breath, we have direct access into our brainstem and into that parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. I'm just going to have a sip of my coffee. So these are the breathing muscles that we work with when we talk about breathing. And I mentioned earlier on when I worked with Cameron McAvoy, so a swimmer, what we did see was a lot of upper chest breathing And there's a few different problems with that we'll sort of discuss now. So if I have a patient and they take a breath in and their predominant pattern is lifting their chest to take a breath, or you'll see their muscles here go, all right, this is a sternocleidomastoid and scalenes initiating respiration, then that is their small muscles, okay, that are doing the job of a much larger muscle, which makes breathing inefficient. Okay, so if breathing becomes inefficient, these muscles are working overtime, and the muscles in the systems can become easily fatigued. Whereas if we start to think about taking belly breaths or using the diaphragm, which you can see down there, and there's a better slide coming up, it's a bigger muscle. Okay, so it's stronger and it's doing the same job. And you think about this: if I have to take a breath with my upper chest, I have to move my pecs, I have to move rib cartilage, I have to move ribs with small muscles. Very inefficient way of doing it. If I utilize the diaphragm, so if I just put my hand on my tummy now and I relax my shoulders and then I take a breath in, and at the same time I'm pushing my tummy out. Okay, that's a way that we can start to initiate diaphragmatic breathing. In the road of the tummy, there's nothing. There's no ribs. There's no cartilage. There's no chest muscles that I have to move. Commonly with athletes, we have a solid six-pack, or we have some abdominal muscles that are really rigid, that have been trained with core exercises or ab exercises. Sometimes that can get in the way of our diaphragmatic breathing, and we have to train athletes how to breathe differently around that structure that they've created there. But by far, that if we can access diaphragmatic breathing, we're doing breathing more efficiently and we're doing it easier with less stress in the system. In the long term, that's how we want to breathe. I don't want to be breathing like some of my asthmatic patients who hyperventilate all the time because they're worried about that shortness of breath feeling. And we don't want to stress the system out too much by using these smaller muscles that are really problematic in the long term with chronic neck pain or chronic back pain. So we'll just move on. So the diaphragm, it is the most important inspiratory muscle, and you can see it there. It lies in the abdominal cavity. It's innervated by the phrenic nerve, so which is a nerve that runs down the side of the neck here. And you can actually access it, and we do in the research with transmagnetic stimulation. So we can stimulate that nerve through the side of the neck here, and then we can actually ask the diaphragm for a maximal contraction by stimulating that nerve. And that allows us a lot of the research that we do. We might send an athlete out to run a few kilometers, and then the athlete comes back, and then we ask them to take a breath in as hard as they can, and then we'll stimulate their phrenic nerve as well, and we'll look at the difference between those two, how hard that the athlete's giving it to us and how hard the muscle can actually work. So I think that's really cool. It's a little side note. And also the diaphragm and the breathing muscle is extensively connected through the core region of the body. So the sternum at the top here, ribs, ligaments in the abdominal wall, and of course the lower back. And a lot of research from Paul Hodges' group, so he's one of the lower back experts, really does show us that if you have a poor breathing pattern, actually I can't really say that if you have a small diaphragm excursion, so what that means is that the diaphragm doesn't move much, you're more likely to have longer chronic low back pain than if your diaphragm moves more. So how we interpret that to say is if you are an upper chest breather, so you don't use your diaphragm much, then you're more likely to have lower back pain. The other cool thing about the diaphragm, and this is what we see when I work with my powerlifters. So most powerlifters, most successful powerlifters will hold their breath when they perform a lift. So let's say they're doing a squat, so the bar's on their shoulders, and they will take a breath in, and they will lock down their core. So they'll lock down and increase that intra-abdominal pressure so that they can transfer the power generated from their legs through their system to move the bar that's sitting on their shoulders. And we see this in swimmers as well, holding their breath on the blocks to generate that power and transfer force from the lower body to the upper body to move. So what and with my testing as well, with all the powerlifters, they generally have one of the strongest diaphragms straight off the bat, because the diaphragm sits, see here, it sits on our top of our core stability. So if we have a weakness in our diaphragm, it's going to let that pressure off. So that pressure that they're generating for that stability through their trunk, if the diaphragm's weak, that pressure is going to be released somewhere. So, and the interesting research where we got this sort of data from was they got subjects to stand in front of a light, and then they got them to move their arm in response to a green light. And what the researchers actually measured was, in response to a light, as soon as the light turned green, before any of the shoulder muscles were initiated, before any of the shoulder muscles switched on, the diaphragm switched on. So the diaphragm switched on in preparation for that arm movement. So again, it's really important with the stability through the core. Here, I'm just going to turn my light up. I think I've got a little dark. So really important stability muscle. And we see that across a number of different sports. Really important for lower back pain and neck pain. So breathing can be seen to be involved or warranted in a number of different areas of my practice as a physio, fixing pain, and also my practice as an exercise physiologist, improving performance. And something that I never really thought about when I started my journey around the breath is that, like the legs, you know, if you're a cyclist and you're cycling along, you can get tired. If you're a swimmer, the triceps and the lats can get tired. The diaphragm gets tired. The breathing muscles get tired. And you can see here, this yellow line is, and this white, both of these lines here, is after 6 minutes of rowing as fast as you can, what happens to the strength of the breathing muscles? So you can see there's a 10 to 11% reduction in the strength of those muscles, indicating fatigue. And that's where we use that system where we stimulate the diaphragm through the side of the neck. So it's taking out volitional exertion. However, if you do breath training, all right, now this is strength breath training. This might be something different that you guys haven't done before or haven't been exposed to. It's where you breathe in against a resistance. Yeah, so there's a device, you put it in your mouth, and you suck against it, and you breathe against this hard resistance. So if you strength train the breathing muscles, what you'll see here, after 4 weeks of strength training the breathing muscles, you'll see the white column still had a 10% reduction in diaphragmatic force production after 6 minutes of fatigue, and the yellow line only had about 4 to 5% reduction after that strength training effort. So by strength training the breathing muscles, we are preventing fatigue of the breathing muscles. Now, why is that important? Well, like any muscle, as soon as it gets fatigued, it asks for more blood flow, right? It produces more carbon dioxide. So if we can delay the fatigue of the diaphragm, we're actually giving the exercising muscles more blood flow, because the diaphragm asks for the blood as well. Hey, I'm tired. Give me more blood because I'm getting tired. I need more blood flow. I need you to remove this carbon dioxide. I need you to give me some oxygen because I'm getting tired after 6 minutes of rowing. Okay, if we can prevent that or reduce that fatigue, as you can see here with the breathing, then we are definitely supplying more blood flow to those exercising limbs. And that's been shown in research as well. And it's a really cool article as well that I won't go into now. But by improving the strength of the breathing muscles, we're giving the exercising muscles more blood flow. And that's shown again in the research by more improvements in whole body exercise across many different sports. So apart from the performance improvements and the physiological changes around the breathing, what we also start to look at, and we sort of mentioned before as well, is the concept of it tapping into the nervous system and that brainstem. That's where the breath and the respiration is generated. So what I talk a lot about with athletes. Yes?
Before you move on to the nervous system, we have a question, if you can answer it. Are there certain types of breathing that are more likely to contribute to stitches or stomach cramps?
Good question. In terms of certain types of breathing, I don't think that's the case with stitches. Actually, the verdict is a little bit out on the stitch and what it actually is caused by. What we do know is that sports where we're bouncing along, so running, horse riding as an example, there's types of sports that you're more likely to present with a stitch. If you consume water or food before doing the sport, you're more likely to get a stitch. And we think it's got to do with tendons or with fascia in and around the stomach and diaphragm, that repeated bouncing activity creates some sort of nervous system response where we get that feeling of having a stitch. Certainly, I've seen many athletes come to work with me about stitches, as something that affects their performance. So I train them to breathe differently, and I don't train them to breathe around a stitch. I don't say, well, this breathing technique is creating a stitch, so I want you to breathe like this when you get a stitch, and when you don't, then you breathe like this. Unfortunately, there's no magic cure for a stitch other than stopping and sorting it out, as most of athletes have done it before. What we do try and do is improve the breathing technique, which may lead to reduction in the presentation of our stitch, along with maybe looking at technique in your bouncing, and also don't take on food or drink prior to exercise, which I think most athletes have sort of cottoned onto as well. I hope that answers the question as best as I can. Thank you for the question, though. In terms of, like I said, moving away from the physiological component. So in much of my early career, I was very much like objective measures. Give me the data, give me the data. I want to improve performance. Let's have a look at your breathing technique. Let's make it stronger. Let's take more volume in. Let's take more air in quicker for our swimmers. And then I started working with athletes who came to me with certain problems about pre-performance anxiety. I'm paddling to the start line and I'm starting to get nervous because I've won a few races and now I'm in world championships, and I'm looking at across the line up here, and there's huge German ladies about to paddle against me, and Bulgarians and Russians, and I'm from Australia, and I'm new to this sport. I'm talking about a certain athlete, a kayaker that I've worked with around this topic. So she was really worried what to do in that 5 minutes when she gets in a boat and then makes her way to the start line, because her head was just taking over and it wasn't putting her in the right frame of mind to perform at her best. So as we've seen, the breath has a direct connection to the brainstem and a direct connection to our nervous system. So some athletes, you'll see them wearing headphones, listening to hip hop and driving around, getting super relaxed and super pumped for their events. Other athletes, you'll see them super calm, listening to really chilled out music, doing yoga almost, or meditating. And what I can't tell athletes is what their level of stress is that determines their level of performance. What I can tell athletes is you can change that level of stress quite quickly using the breath. And as an athlete, you should know if you need to be pumped up, ready for your event, if you need to be super chilled to perform, or if you need to be in some sort of medium level of stress to perform at your best. The research shows us here, which you can see on the screen, that a medium level of stress is great for most athletes, but I've worked with athletes that perform their best when they're super mellow. And I've worked with athletes that need to almost have a fight before they go out to their sport, so that they're ready to go and super pumped up. What the breath allows us to do is move us along that stress curve quite quickly and quite easily. We're going to talk about reducing that level of stress, so removing that level of stress down to more towards that sleep environment. And you can see there on the curve, if we go down towards that level of stress, sleep does occur. So I'm going to tell you this thing, we call it sleep breathing, but my athletes use it if they feel like they're too excited or they're too pumped up, or they're too nervous, so that brings themselves back into things that they can control. Really great for anxiety, really great to get to sleep as well. So we're going to do that now. So what I want everyone to do is just find a nice, comfortable spot. This will take probably about 5 minutes. So I call it the 5x5, the sleep breathing method. And again, we're shifting our system back towards that sleep area and more around the parasympathetic nervous system. So if we're stressed, if we're anxious, if we've just had something happen to us, this sleep breathing is a really fantastic way to bring the system down. So nice, comfortable place. I'll just get you to close your eyes and gently relax. And what we're going to do here is we're going to focus on the exhale. So when we breathe in, I don't want you to breathe in any more, all right, or any less than you normally breathe in. And what I want you to do is purse your lips, so pinch your lips a little bit, and then exhale nice and slowly. So I'll make a sound with my breathing so that you can hear it. And I'll also count the breaths in. All right, so breath in, breath out. Breath in and out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breath in. Breath out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breath in. And breath out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breath in. And breath out. 5, 4, 3, 2, and hold. Hold the breath. When you're holding your breath here, I want you to listen to your body. I want you to, as soon as the body asks for a breath, I want you to give it to it. So you shouldn't take the first breath as, I need to breathe again. Listen to the body. Listen to that first trigger. It could be the neck. It could be the tummy. It could be the throat. As soon as your body needs to take a breath, let's take a breath in and join me when you're ready. Breath in. And out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breath in. And out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breath in. And now, 5, 4, relax all your muscles. 2, breath in. And out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breath in and out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breath in and out. 5, 4, 3, 2, and hold. And same again, listen to the body. As soon as the body asks you to take a breath, give it a breath. Listen to where that trigger comes from within your body. Is it your neck? Is it your throat? Is it your shoulders? Is it your tummy? As soon as your body asks you to take a breath, give it the breath. And we'll stop it there. And normally we do 5 repetitions of that. So that's 2 complete cycles. And normally we do 3 more to complete that sleep breathing pattern or until you fall asleep. But you can do 1 of them, you can do 2 of them, 3 of them, depending on how much time you have. But you should see quite quickly. I'll measure my heart rate as well. I wasn't doing it that great, and I also choked halfway through. So you should see your heart rate reduce as well while doing that. What you should also notice is that hold time on the exhale starts to get progressively longer. So you start to feel more comfortable with no air in the system. Do you have any questions about that sleep breathing model there?
Jim, does it need to be done with breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth, or does it really matter?
I like to breathe out through the mouth for this method, so I can control my exhalation better. If you breathe out through the nose, there's no way to sort of slow down your exhalation without putting stress through the system.
Yep.
So however you want to breathe in, nose or mouth, but breathing out through. And I personally like to use a lot of sounds with my breath because I think that has an effect. So you'll always hear me if I'm doing my breathing techniques. It'll be and then actively relaxing. So with your exhale, push your shoulders away. Feel those tight areas in your body as you're breathing out, because that's part of that process as well.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we'll just move on. I've only got a couple more slides to go, and then we're done. A lot of people ask me about breath hold because it's something cool, or they're a water person, or they're a big wave. I've just started recently I'm a freediver, but I also just recently started getting into spearfishing as well. So it's a great way to practice a really lovely sport and also get a nice reward for it as well by taking home some fish. Really, the breath hold is when it's done in its early stages. It's how you're dealing with pain, so how your nervous system deals with pain. And you'll see a lot of freedivers and spear fishermen trying to get just as relaxed as possible, reducing their heart rate as much as possible before they do a dive. The reason for this is because if your heart rate's going and you're exercising or you're energized, you're producing carbon dioxide quicker. And we know that carbon dioxide is the stimulus to take a breath. So the breath hold and that experience being underwater hurts like hell the first few times you do it because your CO2 triggers are high. Particularly when we work with asthmatic patients. If you have asthma, then your CO2 triggers are generally high. So there's a whole method, it's called Buteyko method. It came from a chiropractor, but its whole method is around the Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McKeown. That's another great book. The whole idea around Buteyko method is reducing the number of breaths the body needs and reducing our CO2 trigger stimulus, because what we commonly see in clinic, in pathology, is patients who overbreathe. So whether it's stress related or it's smoking related or it's pathology related, this idea that we're always overbreathing using these upper breathing muscles, which creates more stress. So they're in this negative feedback cycle of stress, creating more stress, which creates more stress. And they go around and around. There's another great bunch of breathing practitioners that I've worked with in New Zealand as well, called the Radcliffe method. So they're another fantastic bunch of professionals who look at that model of breathing. So this hyperventilation, super high stress environment has created a particular type of breathing pattern that we see in clinic a lot. And the breath hold and slowing down our respiratory rate has a really great way of adding a stress to the body that we have to deal with internally, because it's just a pain signal. So how do you deal with that pain? Do you fight it? If you're fighting that, then what we're doing is we're producing more carbon dioxide and you're going to give up quite quickly. If we put you in the water, or if we ask you to breath hold and the pain starts to increase and you start to relax into that, you start to recognize that it's just a physiological sign. It's not driving you. It's just the body telling you what's going on. If I explain to my patients, hey, this is a signal, this is how we can change it, this is how I want you to react to it, then a lot of our patients can just improve their ability to deal with stress by working on breath hold, because it's a stress they can present. It's a stress that they can manage. And then it's a breathing techniques that they have inside themselves when they find themselves in these trigger situations. They're walking into the room with the boss, or whatever. They're walking past the place where they're attacked, or whatever the stimulus is for that anxiety or for that threat. They have something internally within them that can help manage that. So I'll let individuals at home do their own breath hold. I don't need to walk people through that. If I'm in a clinic environment working with a patient, I'd like to get that breath hold over 2 minutes. Why 2 minutes? I just think it's a cool number, and a lot of my patients would be under a minute to start with. If I'm working with a Kai Lenny, a big wave surfer, he's got a 5-minute breath hold. So he is needed. If he gets wiped out in a big wave, and he just won the big wave awards last night, he could be under there for a while, and not in a really super calm environment, but a high stress environment, because his heart rate's up, his adrenaline's pumping, he's just paddled or towed into this huge wave. So there's a different whole type of training that we train him. Compared to patients with pathology or other types of patients trying to manage different things. And I guess that leads me back to my start of the presentation, is breathing such a powerful tool. However, I feel like it's been just flung left, right and center and said, well, here's some breathing stuff for you, when that person doesn't know who you are and doesn't know your sport. So if you're going to take on some breathing, maybe get some advice or listen to this podcast and get some tips and techniques on what you need to fix your certain thing or improve your performance in your sport. And that's exactly what I do. So usually if I work with athletes or with clients, we do a minimum of 3 sessions. Most of the things I can solve in 3 sessions. If you've got a specific thing you're working on, like if I'm working with a swimmer and they're a 200-meter racer and they want to reduce the number of breaths they take in the race, it's going to take a little bit more work, because we have to start looking at race, looking at opportunities to take a breath. If you've got an asthma, that might take 3 consults should be fine, but it would go over a longer period of time. If you're a dancer or a cyclist, then 3 consults would be fine to move you in the right direction and be doing the right breath training for you and for your exercise, because you might actually be doing yourself a disservice utilizing some techniques that are out there now. An example is the Wim Hof. I wouldn't do that prior to my sports performance, because I'm moving myself up that curve and increasing the stress, which may or may not be the right thing for me. But I'm also stimulating the body and changing the pH of the bloodstream, which enables it to hold onto oxygen more at the level of the tissues. So it's going to make exercise harder for that individual, which is not what you want before a performance. I love the breath. I love working with different athletes across different sports, and I'm a physio and exercise physiologist. So I'd love to help anyone out there about the breath or about getting to sleep. And you sort of just touched on sleep, but I used to be a sleep health practitioner, and it is the foundation of health. So if you don't sleep correctly, that's certainly something you should address, and you should prioritize your sleep before you start prioritizing Instagram. You need to get that 8 hours of sleep if you're an athlete. If you want to adapt to the stimulus that you've created through the day, sleep is so important, and utilize that sleep breathing method to help you get back to sleep, or help you get to sleep and shift you towards that parasympathetic mode to enable that rest. Cool. I think I'm done, Miriam.
James, that was awesome. And I love that you insisted on the sleep at the end, because it's so important. And I wanted to ask you specifically related to the sleep, relaxation, sleep, and I guess fighting anxiety. Is the 5x5 sort of the technique that you would use most of the time to lower yourself down that stress curve?
Yeah, exactly. It's what we're starting to realize now when we look at sleep graphs. So what we measure what happens when we're asleep. What happens before we get to sleep is so important, which sets up what happens when we're asleep. Most of us think, okay, we'll go to sleep. Once we're asleep, then the body just does its sleep thing, but it's wrong. If you've had alcohol, if you're stressed, if you're smoking, if you're doing anything, screen time before going to bed, all this impacts what happens when you're asleep. So generally, what it looks to do is reduce the amount of deep REM sleep, which is the rest and restorative sleep patterns, converting actions in the day to memories and long-term memories and muscle memories. That's so important as an athlete. So if you're missing out on that because of your smoking or your alcohol or your screen time or your anxiety, but you're stressed out before going to bed, then that sleep breathing method is designed to move the nervous system towards that sleep model, which is what the body wants. So if we're in that calm restorative mode before we go to sleep, then we're likely to jump through those sleep cycles quite quickly and get more of that deep restorative sleep that we need.
Yeah. We actually have another question from one of our participants. Catherine is asking, how do you have combat sport athlete work with their breath, and is the focus on in between session? She's a wrestler. She has many matches during the day. And so she's asking, is the focus on in between session or during the actual match?
Yeah, good question. I've worked with two types of combat sports. So first of all, I worked with MMA athletes in Vegas, so at the big UFC arena. And what we were working with then, I sort of mentioned it before, was different types of breathing to access when you're in certain holds. So if you're being squeezed around the belly, how to access upper breathing patterns. If you're being choked, how to utilize different ways to get air in. And then we strength train those participants. So if they did have some restriction on breathing, they were able to get past those restrictions in some cases. I think more down this pathway of Catherine's question is I worked with two, actually, Australian world champion boxers, and we were really focused on what happens between rounds. So how can we utilize that time the best to help the system recover so that they're ready to go, the next round. So, professional fights, 12 rounds, 3 minutes. What happens in that 30 seconds between rounds, a minute between rounds for these athletes, and how can they best utilize that time for recovery? But there's many different, wrestler, certain positions, certainly just by improving the breathing muscle strength, the research is clear on what that delivers to people. Reductions in shortness of breath. So if you're short of breath during your performance, that's going to impact your decision making and your ability to perform at a higher level, and also improvements in whole body exercise. So by delaying the fatigue of the breathing muscles, we're going to get more blood flow to the exercising muscles so that you can, ninja someone in that wrestling arena much better. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I love this idea that you can use the breath both for supporting yourself as being healthier, right? As taking care of yourself from a sleep perspective, an ongoing well-being, as well as helping you with your performance. I think it's just totally underused.
The thing that opened me up wasn't athletic performance in the breath. It was, I worked with a gentleman who had lung disease, and he was with patients with lung disease, when they get really bad, they avoid eating because when they put things in their mouth, they can't breathe, and they're just scared of that shortness of breath. So shortness of breath, and as we sort of touched on this in the breath hold space, it's such a fear, and it's such an overpowering feeling for individuals that they try and avoid. So this gentleman he hadn't visited his family because he wouldn't want to walk up a flight of stairs to get on a plane. So he hadn't visited them in 7 years. And I had 2 sessions with this gentleman, and 3 weeks later, he was on a plane because he wasn't scared about walking up a flight of stairs. And I was just like, for me as a health practitioner, that's no better feeling to than this guy he just had so much joy in his smile and in his conversation to me when he came back to see me. He's like, now he's free, he can go anywhere and do anything, and he has, and that's what the research shows us as well in the patients with disease, is it improves patients' quality of life. and like I said, that was got me hooked. And then I did a lot of work in that pathology space. And then 6-7 years ago, I started migrating across to the athlete space. So it's an awesome tool, and we all have it. And we just utilize it better, then we can get those benefits across the board, whether it's pathology, performance, sleep, stress levels. So thanks for your time.
We actually have a question for you on a book recommendation. So someone asking if you've heard of the book Breathing for Warriors.
Yep.
And if you have any recommendation or research book for us.
I've read all those books. I think that's Dr. Belize's book, the Breathing for Warriors one. I read Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McEwen. So I've read a lot of those books, and I've been thinking about writing a book, but my philosophy is I just listen to everyone's ideas and concepts, and I've not really come up with any of my own. I've just sort of studied their own and said, okay, well, that particular type of breathing fits this type of patient or this type of sport. If people would like reading journal articles, I can send you some journal articles that might start to stimulate. I guess I don't like to base my space on what someone else's philosophy and ideas are. I like to say, well, this is the method, this is the physiology, and then apply that to various bunches of things. But the Warriors one's great. Oxygen Advantage is great as well. But I can certainly share some links with you, Miriam.
Absolutely. I will share with everybody your information, some of the recommendation for article if you have. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
We have a comment from one of the participants saying that it was so informative and really interesting, and I do agree. I really like the emphasis that you have on the fact that the breath is something that can be intentional, and I can see the link with the mental coaching as well, and how it works hand in hand, and how you can really overcome some of your anxiety, some of even your limiting belief, I think, from a mental coaching perspective through the breath. So it's a really interesting tool.
That's an interesting concept that we didn't really touch on. It's I've only in the last few years have I started to bring that into my practice, and that's this idea of the central governor theory, where we put limitations on our own performance because of the environment we're in, or what we've seen, or what we've felt, or what we believe. And I use this analogy all the time. I think 10, 12 years ago, no one had done a backflip on a motorbike. And then one person does a backflip, and then a month later, there's 5 or 6 people doing backflips on a motorbike, So that central governor idea is what stopped those other 5 or 6 people from being the first person. And it's only their own beliefs and their own philosophies or experiences that stop them from achieving greatness. And I think the breath has a really important factor in shifting our central governor hypothesis, particularly around the breath hold space, because it's such a strong stimulus, and you can coach someone quite quickly and navigate them through this space. And I'll mention Wim Hof again, that a lot of people get this experience of increasing their breath hold through the Wim Hof space, which is fantastic. But if you overbreathe and you take away that CO2 stimulus, then you're missing out on a lot of that stress to the body, which is what we need to work through to remove that central governor. So again, this idea that we can unleash potential with the breath is 100% there. I'm only starting to experiment with it in breath hold, but also this idea of intermittent hypoxic training, where we're sprinting with breath holds. We're reducing recovery times, and we're holding our breath during this. And this sort of experience is a huge stressful stimulus to the body that I'm experimenting with my athletes and myself to look at how we can lift the lid on that central governor idea. So thanks for that question. That's awesome.
Well, and it's awesome because everything you're talking about is something that I can closely relate to. Obviously, having done synchronized swimming for 20 years, this was what I dealt with on a daily basis, right? It's like this sort of this stimulus that you have to breathe that we were fighting every single day, and it's heavily linked to your mental conditioning and how you improve it. It's quite interesting, but I really like the intention that you're taking into the breathing. And one important thing too is we do a lot of webinar on mindfulness, and the first pillar of mindfulness is the breath, and it always starts with that. And so I think it is really a super important building block both for wellness and performance. So yeah, it was.
Well, you're in a
awesome.
unique position. It's the sport that you've experienced is exactly that, where you're breath holding under high duress, and you've got to make it look easy, and that's again the pillars of what I try and provide to people who I'm working with is make breathing easier. If you come up out of the water, you can't be like puffing. You might only have a second to go before you go back under. So what does that breath look like? That's got to be the best breath you've ever taken, Miriam, because then you've got to go underwater for another 30 seconds and exercise.
I don't know if it is, because when you take that first breath, like the more you get into your routine and you're holding your breath, that breathing becomes associated with a shot of pain. The more you breathe, the more you get lactic acid shot into your legs. So although you get that like relief because you're breathing, the other side is you getting buildup of lactic acid as you go through your routine. So it's a really interesting process and something that you're constantly trying to like push further as you progress.
That stimulus is awesome. It's like that stimulus to the body, which you're talking about, that shot of lactic acid and breath holding is exactly where the new research is coming out. And we're only starting to see new models in animal models about what we can achieve. And think about like altitude training, how we stimulate the body by taking it, removing the oxygen, so the body it produces more red blood cells, which allows athletes to perform higher after 6 weeks of altitude training. The same idea is exactly what your training does, Miriam, is can we achieve that same idea in shorter periods of time using high intensity hypoxic training, which is exactly the sport that you were involved with for so long. And that's I love that sort of research and that type of practice where we're trying new things out and we're pushing the boundaries, and that's awesome. So yeah, thanks again for having me, Miriam. It's been great.
Well, no, thanks to you. That was a really great presentation, super informative. Really great to be able to have you today and taking the time, especially with the time difference. It's a little bit difficult for us, so it was great to be able to have you. I will follow up after this event with the recording as well as information about what you do to all our participants, and wanted to thank everybody for joining us, and feel free to visit our website if you want to participate in any of the other events that we have, but also you'll find some information about GEMS and this event. So I'll be sharing this in a couple of days. All right, James. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to you. Have a great day down under, and to everybody, have a good evening. Thank you so much.